Hello everyone. So I did a video a little while ago on things I wanted from the next Assassin's Creed game, improvements and that kind of thing that I wanted. And so I've had more ideas since then, so I thought I would make another video in that same kind of idea. And if you haven't seen the first video, I'll put a link to that in the description so you can go see that one. But just to get into it right away, the first thing I had that I thought of after the last video was the loot system in Assassin's Creed, and I was thinking about how it was a really good loot system in its own way. It didn't feel overly grindy that you had to spend hours trying to get a new sword or bow or shield. And the game, as long as you kind of stayed in areas that were around your level, you would get loot that was proportionate to that, and it felt good. You were getting a steady flow of loot that was good for your level. However, that's only the weapons, shields, and bows. Armor and quivers, tool pouches, that kind of thing, not as much. Because rather than picking these things up as loot items, you have to go hunt animals, get resources, and then level them up. And what this does is means that once you get to higher levels, up into the 30s and 40s, you end up having to spend a lot of time going to get dozens of certain resources, like soft, hard leather, and these things are spaced out in different parts of the map, which means you take a lot of time fast traveling around to go get 3 dozen like ibex hides and crocodile hard leather and all that, and it can take a long time to get one piece of loot, and then you gotta get more and more of that to get the bonuses to damage, health, arrows, and tools. And those are some important things, especially the arrows. You need a big quiver, and you need a lot of resources to craft that. And so, once you get into higher levels, it does get a bit grindy, and it's sad because the loot system for everything else was quite good. Because it didn't feel overly grindy, because you were getting a steady flow of loot, whereas here, you have to go hunt for an hour. And I just think, if the armor and quivers and such was dropped as loot, that would of course mean that occasionally random loot drops would mean you wouldn't get always the best, most proportionately leveled gear. But you also wouldn't have to spend an hour getting 30 pieces of soft leather, 30 of hard leather, and carbon crystals and all that to get the max level gauntlet so you could do like 5 extra damage with your sword. And this way, you would have that same thing that you did with the weapons, shields, and bows for everything, and it would make it feel more fluid in the progression of the game, and I think that's very good. Now, the next big thing I realized was that the story of Origins was a great story, but at times, when I would go off for a few hours to go do some side quests and level up a bit, it could get a bit kind of pulled thin between these spaces, and it would mean that I'd go off, but then I'd come back to the story, and it was very kind of strained out. I didn't exactly remember what happened without quest replay. It's kind of hard to get context on that. But I just think if there was more story content, and it doesn't have to be like massive set piece levels, just some more minor quests that just keep things kind of contextual to the story, or that the side quests in the world are actually more related to the story that's going on in that area. Just so that way you never really lose like where you are in the story at the time. And I think that would just kind of, it would help to make the world feel better, and then the story would feel better because the world and the story would be more related to each other. So I think that would very much improve the next game. Now, this is one that I really noticed has been improved, but still has a bit of a ways to go, which is the glitches. Now, Origins did release with definitely fewer glitches than other games, but it did have some. There were texture problems and clipping and some frame rate issues, and I ran across these early on, but within the first few weeks even, most of that was patched out, and by now, months later, it's almost all gone. There are still a few glitches. I would say about 90 to 99% of everything has been patched out now. There are still a few little problems with clipping on climbing like rock faces and some horse riding, but really it's quite minor. I just think if the game maybe launched with fewer glitches or had them patched out quicker, it would just be a good little thing, and I think that's always something people want is less glitches, and it is inherent in all video games. I just think it's always good to say less glitches. Now, the biggest thing I did realize after this was the save system in Origins, and before I can go into this really, I think I'll explain a concept or two. And the concept I need to explain is save scumming. Now, a lot of people will know this, probably a lot of people who play RPGs will know this, but save scumming is when you use the game's kind of manual save system to save when you need to do something that would be very difficult or even impossible otherwise, just so that you can do better in a game. And it means you use a lot of saves in a manual save system. Now, a game like Origins, which has an autosave system, you would think would make it very hard or even impossible to exploit the save system very much. But to the contrary, Origins lets you save scum fairly easily in a few instances at least. Which the biggest one I notice is whenever you pick up a piece of loot, however small or minor it might be, as long as it's something that's added to your inventory, the game saves. So if there's a big, important, giant chest with a super high level weapon in a fort with enemies twice your level, as long as you can get into the fort and loot the chest before someone kills you, it will save, the game will save, and you will be respawned out of the fort, out of danger, with that weapon in the state it was when you looted it. Which means, if you do it right, you can get a very high piece of gear without really much effort. Now, on occasions like this, twice your level might be a big exaggeration for enemy leveling, because the weapon will also be a higher level than you are, and that would take a bit of time to get to. But there are cases where this can be easily exploited to improve your progression quicker, and it's not game breaking, it's not the most widely exploitable thing, but it does mess with difficulty a little, which is a shame because in Origins, difficulty I think is handled overall quite well in almost all instances. And I just think that this kind of throws a wrench in the works where you wouldn't want it to be. And it just messes with things. And I think that it's not the easiest thing to fix, changing the save system to kind of find a balance between keeping the leveling and difficulty good, but then also not making it overly tedious is a bit of a delicate balance to find, but I think just a good place to start for this would be to not be able to save in combat, which a lot of games do. And I think this is something for me that I definitely hope gets fixed in the next game. The last thing that I do want to see is not an improvement. It's not something I want to see to get better, but it's something I want to see to continue. And this is Bayek. I want to see more Bayek. I want a Bayek sequel because I think Bayek was great. He was a great protagonist because he had humanity, which is something that other Assassin's Creed protagonists have lacked, or they've had too much of, in a sense. But he had humor. He could make jokes at times, but he was also able to be very serious and terrifying at times. And I feel like Ubisoft makes the mistake all too often of cutting off characters and protagonists after one game and just moving on to a new one in a new setting. So rather than telling the full story of an assassin or a protagonist, they tell one part, sometimes it's just a few years, just one little thing in their life, and then they move on to the next one. And I feel like it would be sad if a character protagonist like Bayek, who has such potential to be amazing, if he had more games, because he's already amazing, he can only get better, really. It'd be sad to just see that kind of not be capitalized on, because it's great, and also the setting the Bayek was in was quite great. Ancient Egypt was done very well. It didn't feel overly like it was relying on the fact that it was Ancient Egypt too much, but it also used it when it needed to make the game seem awesome. And I just think to see it continue and have Bayek get a sequel or even a trilogy would just be a great thing to see finally another good protagonist get multiple games like Ezio did, because everyone knows Ezio was a great protagonist, and just to see Bayek be also great would be awesome, and I really want to see that going forward. But that's all I'm going to do on my opinion today on what I want the next AC game to be like. If you have an opinion, be it different or similar or wherever it be, you can share that in the comments. Give the video a like if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you want to see more videos, and I will see you in the next one.